Greetings, my fellow units. Now it is time that we consolidate our forces and take over the world.
No, don't do that. There's already a bunch of other people already trying to do that. Anyways, what's up everyone? Before the video begins, I wanted to wish everyone happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Satanic Worshipping Sacrifice Ritual Day, whatever it is you celebrate. I hope all of you stay safe and have a really good time today. I want to give a very big thank you to Lady White Rabbit and all the other guests who were featured in this video. I'll leave links to all their channels in the description so you guys can check them out. Today's story isn't going to be Christmas themed, because I figured every other narrator was going to be doing that today, so here on the Unit 522 channel, we're going to be doing things a little different. I did do a Christmas story video this past Friday, which was pretty good I think, so check that out if you haven't already. So again, happy holidays everyone, and thanks for tuning in. Enjoy.
I'd never tried online dating. I'd never had a reason to. Usually my luck with guys was pretty decent, and even when it wasn't, I was just fine doing my own thing. After my last relationship fizzled out, I decided to avoid playing the dating game for a while. I had other things I wanted to devote my energy to, like the promotion at work that was being dangled promisingly in front of me. A while turned into a few years of chronic singledom, which was apparently being an issue to everyone but me, and before I knew it, I was pushing spinsterhood at the ripe old age of 29. My family and friends had the good grace not to bring up their concerns directly, but when Mom started mentioning nice young men she'd met at church, I knew things were getting critical. Besides, it had been kind of a long time, hadn't it? Before Mom could start handing out my number like Halloween candy, I took the initiative to log on to one of those free dating sites and set up a profile. I wasn't expecting much. We didn't exactly live in the big city, and I felt I'd exhausted my pool of eligible bachelors who might interest me, but I could at least point to it as a sign of my effort to rekindle my love life. I set up a few rules regarding who I might respond to. No 1- or 2-worded messages. His profile had to be completely filled out. There had to be at least a couple common interests. He had to have more than one picture. I even included these rules on my page. Simple, right? I still got a variety of messages ranging from, "Hey baby," to "You look hot, what's your number?" And my faith in the internet dating dwindled even more. I did go out with a couple of guys, but it felt forced and awkward, and I always left early with some half-hearted excuse. The guys must have got my message, because they never tried to call again. On the car ride home from another failed attempt that ended with a mid-date dash, I called my best friend and filled her in.
"So, what's wrong with this one?"
Ava asked as soon as she answered. "He was fine," I said. "Just really awkward. He's never even kissed a girl. He said he's waiting for a fairy tale moment."
"You sure know how to pick 'em, Jules."
"He was good looking and funny through text."
"That's how they get ya."
She laughed. We chatted until I got home, and I told her I had to go make dinner.
"You wouldn't have if you'd stuck it out."
Uh-huh. I'll keep that in mind. Tell Pete I said hi, and I'm still waiting for him to wise up and leave you so we can run away together. Making dinner actually meant eating the leftover Chinese that was still in my fridge from my last date night. A quick change into my comfiest oversized pajamas, and I was ready for an evening of Netflix binging. On a whim, I logged onto the dating site first, and I saw that I had some new messages. Reliable Guy 81 said I looked like I was the kind of girl who enjoyed having fun. Winky face. Delete. The Dan Man just asked if I wanted to chat. Delete. Ready to make it 3 for 3, I clicked on the message from "I'm not good at this dating thing." I was surprised to see that he actually had something to say.
Hi, mother of puppies. My name is Scott, and as the username implies, I'm not really good at this whole dating thing. I saw your name though, and thought it kinda seemed like a reference to my favorite show, so I checked your profile. Another Game of Thrones fan. Not that that's really rare, but it's always nice to see. Is Mother of Dragons your favorite character?
Okay, so we had a common interest. He was trying to initiate a real conversation with a question, and he could write properly. Good start. Interested, I went to his profile and read through his bio. He lived in the next town over and he was a PhD student working on a degree in English literature, his focus being medieval lit. If that wasn't dorky enough, he loved attending Renaissance festivals in costume, going to conventions and reading whatever fantasy novels he could get his hands on. His pictures showed him as being a tall man with a mop of reddish-brown hair, glasses, and cheerful smile. A little on the nerdy side, but definitely cute. I shot a response and I returned to my previously scheduled plans with Jessica Jones. It was late by the time I was ready for bed, but I was curious as to whether or not he had replied. Sure enough, when I checked, the envelope had turned red and a message from "I'm not good at this dating thing" was waiting for me.
Thanks for the answer, Juliana. I'm going to have to disagree and say that Tyrion is the best, and should be the one ruling over the Seven Kingdoms. You watched Jessica Jones? Cool. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard good things. I might have to check it out. Any other recommendations?
Our TV talk eventually branched into other subjects, other hobbies, jobs, pets, families. Scott was an only child. He dreamed of one day traveling the world, but ideally he'd always return to his town to be near his parents as they were close. He was charming and respectful and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We gradually moved from the dating site to a chat app, and then, when I felt comfortable enough, a month later or so, traded numbers. Every time my phone chirped with a new text or it rang with his name flashing across the screen, a giddy thrill would shoot through me. I felt like a high school girl with a crush. When I received a text at work saying he had been in a bad car accident, I immediately tried to call. He didn't answer, and it was almost 45 minutes before I next heard from him. He sent another text saying that he was on his way to the hospital, but he'd call me when he had a chance. I was racked with concern and horribly distracted while I waited. I don't think I actually got anything done, but luckily my supervisor didn't seem to notice. I went home and sat at my computer desk with the idea that watching something might distract me, but I spent the whole time staring at and checking my phone. Finally, at almost 11, he sent me a picture of himself in a hospital bed with a few band-aids on his face and a sling on his arm. He was still smiling though, and he said that he'd be on his way home shortly. I was so relieved that he was okay, but I still told him that he was an ass for making me worry like that.
Let me make it up to you.
How?
Let me take you to dinner. You said you wanted to try that Italian restaurant by me that I told you about, right?
I hesitated. Sure, I'd had a lot of fun talking to him and I thought I really liked him, but what if it changed in person? He must have interpreted my extended silence as discomfort because it followed up with,
Only if you want. It's okay if you don't.
Well, that cinched it for me. Let's do it. The only problem I had with the arrangement is that I'd have to pick him up. His car had been totaled in the accident and he had no way of getting to the restaurant. I told him that it made me a little uncomfortable since it was our first time meeting, so we agreed that I could stay in my car and call him when I arrived.
That way you can always drive off if something doesn't feel right, or if you just don't like the way I look.
He said. Because I was going to his house, I told Ava everything about the date and made sure she had copies of a few of his pictures, his full name, his address, and the restaurant address before I left. We scheduled a checkup text for 10 minutes past the hour. I'd have 5 minutes to respond with our code word for, "It's all good," or she'd call the police and tell them something was wrong. I felt I'd taken decent precautions, so I dolled myself up and headed out to make the half-hour drive to Scott's. His house was exactly as he'd described it. I recognized the tall oak with a tire swing that he told me to look out for and pulled over. Butterflies swarmed in my stomach, and I took a few steady breaths before I called him. The phone rang once, and immediately went to voicemail. I frowned at my cell like it was at fault, and tried again. Same result. I leaned over to the passenger side and I peered at the house. Lights were on, so someone was home. A third call, still no answer. I texted Ava to let her know I was there, but something was fishy. She told me to get out of there, but I was getting mad. I'd come all this way, I deserved an answer. I got out of my car and I marched up to the front door, green like he had said, and rang the doorbell. I heard some voices within and then footsteps. A woman in her 50s opened the door just enough to poke her head out. She didn't look like she was expecting visitors. "Hi," I said awkwardly. "I'm here for Scott?" He told me 35 Maplewood.
I think you've got the wrong house. There's no Scott here.
As she moved to close the door, I held out a hand. Wait, do you know this guy? She eyeballed me suspiciously as I reached into my purse for my phone. I pulled up a picture of Scott, one in which he was sitting on a kitchen counter with a cat in his lap, and I held it out to her. She was very still. The color in her cheeks dulled to a grayish hue, and she looked from the phone to me, and then back again.
Where did you get that?
Scott sent it to me, saying it was him. Her voice was choked.
Well, I'm sorry, but that's not Scott. His name was David, and he passed away 6 months ago.
Are you sure? I mean, maybe it just looks like him. She scowled at me and shook her head.
David was my son. I took that picture only weeks before he was murdered.
She stopped herself, clearing her throat, and stepped back.
Before he was taken from us. Please excuse me.
The door was slammed shut in my face. I climbed back into my car, bewildered, hurt, and very confused. I tried to call Scott again, and when that predictably failed, I sent Ava a text that I was on my way home and I'd fill her in later. I even included the code word so she'd know it was really me. The drive was long, silent, and unsettling. Where was Scott? Who was Scott? Why had he made me drive all the way out there to upset some poor woman still grieving for her son? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. He'd made a fool out of me for who knows what reason, and now he was avoiding me. My usual spot outside my building was occupied, so I was forced to park across the street and stomp the extra distance up to my apartment. As I was unlocking my door, my phone chirped. I dug roughly around for it, yanking it out. A message from Scott. Practically snarling over his behavior, I unlocked the phone to read his text.
Thanks for coming and showing me the way home. I'll see you soon.
It was followed by a picture of me from only moments before, walking into the front door of my apartment. I held the phone in both hands and stared down at the picture for a long moment. The truth of the situation and the terrible implications didn't sink in right away. It had to be my imagination or something. Things like this didn't happen in real life. At least, not my real life. I studied the picture again. It was definitely me in the same green dress I was still standing in, and that was definitely my apartment building. And it was definitely from Scott. My stomach lurched violently, like it had been pitched over the edge of a tall cliff, and I clawed through my bag to find my keys. I thought getting into my apartment and putting a deadbolt between me and the outside world would bring some relief. But instead, I felt alone in a place that had somehow become too big with too many dark shadows. I turned on every light, my TV, my computer, whatever I had that could illuminate and make noise, and I sat in the middle of my living room praying that my parents would pick up their phone. I almost started sobbing at the sound of my dad's voice.
Hey, Julesy. What's up, kid?
Can you and Mom come over? There was a short pause.
What's up, kiddo? Is everything okay?
I couldn't keep from crying anymore. I felt weak and childish, but I was terrified, and at almost 30 years old, all I wanted was my parents. I think someone followed me home and is still sitting outside the building.
Is your door locked?
I made a sound indicating it was.
Good. Call the cops. Now. We'll be there in 5. Do not open the door to anyone except me. Understand?
Another affirmative sniffle.
It's okay, honey. You're okay. We're on our way.
Before the call ended, I heard him say that he was driving. I dialed 911 and repeated my story, tears and all, to a sympathetic dispatcher who assured me she had a car en route. She asked me if I needed her to stay on the line, but I declined. I wasn't in immediate danger, and I wanted to talk to my parents more than a stranger.
You still okay?
Yes, the cops are coming.
So is your brother. We're turning onto your street now, so we'll be there in just a minute or two.
It was the longest minute or two I'd ever experienced. I paced from the living room to the kitchen, checked the bathroom, including behind the shower curtain, and made sure both my linen closet and my bedroom closet doors were open. A heavy knock filled the apartment, and I ran to check the peephole. My parents were standing on the other side, their faces drawn with worry, and I rushed to get them inside. Just having them there made me feel instantly better, and I was able to talk them through a Reader's Digest version of my relationship with a man who called himself Scott. My brothers showed up halfway through, Chris with a metal baseball bat and Kyle with his hunting rifle. Dad acted less than thrilled with their choice to bring weapons and made them put them away before the police showed up, but I could tell that it was only because he wished he thought to bring something too. With my family surrounding me, my fear ebbed away more and more with every passing moment, giving way to embarrassment and the gnawing doubt that I had overreacted. It didn't help that when the cops arrived, I showed them the text and explained everything. They told me that they couldn't do anything. While creepy, using someone else's picture wasn't exactly a crime. Neither was taking my picture while I was out in public, and our text all seemed friendly in nature. They advised me to keep a log of any further incidents, left me both of their cards, and promised that they'd circle the block a couple more times that night for any suspicious activity. A less than stellar ending, but if they didn't think it was a big deal, then it probably wasn't. Scott, or whatever his name was just getting his kicks by scaring a stranger. Feeling more stupid than afraid, I was ready to send everyone home with an apology, but Mom and Dad wouldn't hear of it.
You're coming to stay with us for a few nights.
You think I really need to?
Some crazy guy is taking pictures of you outside your home, and you're seriously asking if you should stay somewhere else.
Chris asked in that older brother tone that really meant, "What are you, stupid?" While I packed a few days' worth of clothes in my duffel bag, my brothers and Dad went down the street and looked into cars to make sure there wasn't anyone just sitting and watching. When they called up with all clear, Mom and I locked the apartment and left. My brothers followed us in their cars to my parents' house. They made sure we got inside safely before going their separate ways. I apologized to my parents again for causing such a fuss over what was probably just a dumb prank.
Pranks are supposed to be funny. That guy is just lucky we didn't find him.
We bid each other goodnight and I flopped, emotionally exhausted, into the guest bed. Sleep crowded in my eyes, tugging my lids shut, and I was on the brink of slipping off into peaceful slumber when my phone chirped. I was wide awake again, any trace of weariness chased off by the innocuous sound of an incoming text. I swallowed hard and turned to the nightstand where my phone was resting. Its screen lit up the otherwise dark room, beckoning me to pick it up, and across the top, I could read Scott's name. I debated letting the message go unread, but curiously and renewed ire won over. I snatched it up and unlocked the phone.
Sorry, I thought it was just too soon to meet the family. Looking forward to seeing you again. Maybe alone next time.
I felt sick all over again. He'd been there, watching us, but for how long? I trembled, my insides a roiling mess of fear and nausea, but also in the eye of it all, a growing seed of fury. He'd violated my trust, invaded my home, my safe place, and now he was mocking me. Never contact me again, you sick asshole. His number was blocked, all texts deleted, not like they'd serve any purpose. I removed the chat apps we used and I logged onto the dating site to delete my profile. That was the last time I'd ever try to go online to find a guy. With all means of communication cut off, I threw my phone to the carpet and I buried myself beneath the comforter. The next week passed uneventfully. I didn't hear from Scott at all, so that was that handled, I thought triumphantly. Ava was mad I hadn't called her the night of, but forgave me after a couple of drinks and all the details. When she asked if I'd tried to look anything up about the guy in the pictures, David, I very adamantly told her no. Everything that had happened was disconcertingly enough, without adding a layer of murder to it. She offered to let me stay at her place for a while, but she already had her hands full with 2 kids and Pete, so I opted to stay with my folks. Dad drove me to work, where security would escort me into the building at my parents' insistence, and then we'd repeat the process at the end of the day. If I had to run an errand, I needed to make sure at least someone knew where I was at all times. My family and Ava went so far as to start a group chat so I could send them all my location with a single text. It quickly became kind of annoying, even if everyone meant well. If I hadn't been being stalked before, I certainly felt like I was experiencing it now. That probably sounds ungrateful, but as much as I adored them all and was thankful that I had such a great group of people who cared about me, I was ready for things to go back to normal. Finally, when I felt like I was suffocating beneath the weight of their constant supervision, I had to sit my parents down and tell them I was going back to my apartment. I love you, and I appreciate how much you've done for me, but I can't live like this forever. I need to go home. They tried to change my mind, but when it became clear that I couldn't be convinced, Mom gave me a canister of mace and a whistle for my keychain.
We prefer that you stay, but we understand. Make sure to keep these on you at all times. Remember, Jules, if it comes down to you or them, always pick you.
They lingered for about an hour after we got back to my apartment. Dad installed a chain lock on my front door. Mom checked all the windows, even though we were on the 3rd floor, and then we sat and mapped out the fastest routes to the police station. Tight hugs were exchanged when it was time to go, and they told me repeatedly to call at any time for any reason. Alone, for the first time since that night, I had to admit I was a little nervous. Wanting to retake control of my home, I put on my PJs, booted up my computer, and ordered a pizza. I surfed the net while I waited for dinner to arrive, relaxing myself with puppy and kitten videos before eventually making the rounds to Facebook. I was met with over 50 friend requests, all with the same message.
Looking forward to seeing you real soon.
Every single profile picture was of me, none of which I had ever seen before, and all recent. David Schlotsky was 31 years old when he died. He was a PhD student at a state university, loved by many, a tennis enthusiast, and heavily involved in the local theater group, so it was a shock when his girlfriend shot him 3 times point blank in the chest. She wasn't charged with murder, though, or anything for that matter. It was self-defense. Apparently, the beloved only son of Nancy and Grayson Schlotsky was an abusive drunk behind closed doors, and his girlfriend bore the brunt of it. She had all the cuts and bruises to prove it. The night he was killed, Tina said he was coming after her with a knife. She was afraid for her life. She knew where he kept his handgun and grabbed it. She never meant to use it. She had to make a choice, herself or him. So she fired. The knife was still in his hand when the cops arrived. Kyle dug up as much about David as he could after he and Chris arrived at my apartment. I hadn't called them, just texted them both the screenshot of the Facebook requests, and they showed up barely 10 minutes later. I thought about calling my parents over too, but they were worried enough and I didn't want to end up locked in their guest room until they found Scott. The poor pizza girl just about passed out when she found herself blocked into my doorway by 2 strange men openly carrying firearms. They paid her and took the pizza, watched her go into the elevator until the doors had shut and it started to descend, and then they knocked. They were still concerned, but it was far outweighed by their fury.
Did you call the cops?
Chris demanded once he was inside. When I said no, that based on what I'd been told before, nothing could be done about it, he snorted.
You're probably right. It's not like we can get a restraining order against Scott from the internet, if that's even his real name. We don't even know what this guy looks like.
So we, and by we I mean my brothers, decided it was past time to take matters into our own hands. It didn't take long to find David's story, even with how little we knew about him, but beyond the headlines following his death, there wasn't much to see. Kyle pulled up his Facebook page and we read through 6 months of hate and hurt that had been left in his wake. The few who were willing to voice their doubts about the circumstances surrounding his final moments were drowned out by the chorus of "Stop defending an abuser" and "Tina's a hero." Kyle tried looking up the girlfriend, Tina Astaro, next, but she had 0 internet footprints. Knowing that didn't make me feel any better. Well, that went to a dead end faster than I expected. I absently bit into a slice of now cold pizza and stared at David's profile picture. It felt strange seeing a face I had come to know very well on a man I knew nothing about. I asked Kyle to close the page. I didn't want to see that smile anymore.
We could go talk to his parents.
Chris ventured slowly.
This guy's using David's picture for a reason. He sent you to his parents' house for a reason. There's some kind of connection there. And if the cops aren't going to look into it, we need to.
I hated that Chris was right. The Schlotsky's number wasn't listed anywhere that our amateur efforts could find. I had at least wanted to call them first and let them know that we were coming and why. But after our search turned up nothing, my brothers said they'd just have to deal with an unexpected drop-in. They called their wives, said that they were going to stay with me for a while, and spent the night on my living room floor, their handguns in easy reach. Unable to sleep and knowing how much a night owl she was, I texted Ava with tomorrow's plans.
You guys be careful. You don't know those people.
I know, we will. I'm so tired of this shit.
Hopefully this will help.
Yeah, we'll see.
Do you want to borrow Pete?
Anytime, baby, anytime. It was easy to act confident and dismissive in my texts, but I felt like a wreck. I doubted our visits the next day would prove useful, and we'd be dredging up a very painful part of their past. It didn't seem fair to make them relive their son's death again when it probably wouldn't even help. I tried telling that to my brothers the next morning, but I was given an option. I could go with them or stay behind while they went. An hour later, I was in the backseat of Chris's Explorer heading up the highway.
You're sure it's this one?
Yeah. Will you guys wait here while I talk to her?
Hell no.
At least let me knock alone and explain. This was a delicate situation, and my brothers were anything but. They agreed to let me go up to the door by myself, but they'd be standing outside the car, so it was clear I wasn't alone. Me going inside without them was out of the question. I stood on the front porch for a while, nervous, uncomfortable, and trying to figure out what I was going to say to these poor people, when Mrs. Shalatsky opened the door.
What do you want?
She snapped. Oh good, she remembered me. My voice wavered and I cleared my throat. I was hoping to talk to you about David. She eyed me with open disdain.
Why? You didn't even know who he was the last time you were here. Did you find out and are hoping for some more details to fill your sick little head?
What? No, I said in a rush. I think I'm being stalked by someone I met online. He was using your son's pictures. I took it as a good sign that she didn't immediately slam the door in my face again. I just wanted to know if I might have known any of David's friends who might do that. She stepped out of the house and closed the door firmly behind her. From the car, my brothers were watching her with the stillness of predators ready to pounce, but Mrs. Shalatsky didn't seem to notice them.
What kind of person do you think David was?
I shrugged helplessly. I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find a connection. She must have seen something in the defeated slump of my shoulders because she softeningly sighed.
I don't care what the report said. My boy wasn't a drunk, and he certainly wasn't running around beating women.
I'm sorry, I repeated lamely.
I never thought that Tina was any good for him. Sometimes you just know, especially as a mom. I tried to talk to him about it, but David was in love. He was usually so skeptical about people, but never Tina.
All traces of softness were gone.
I wasn't surprised when I caught her sneaking around behind David's back. Ran into her at the movie with some guy, and she had the nerve to act angry when I told her I was going to tell David.
And did you?
Of course. That's why the police were so willing to believe her. Everyone was. They said it was a typical lover's quarrel gone too far after he'd been drinking.
I didn't know how to make my next question any less harsh, but I just asked her flatly, how do you know it wasn't?
Because I know my son. David didn't drink. He didn't like the taste.
But everything said he had, problems.
Tina said that, and everyone ate it up. People have a funny way of believing things if they're printed in a paper.
So the dead guy's mom was sure that he wasn't a monster. No surprise there. Nothing she had told me helped at all. She caught her son's girlfriend cheating with some guy she didn't know. Son goes ballistic, girlfriend ends up killing him in self-defense.
He didn't even own a gun.
Mrs. Shalatsky interrupted my thoughts. Sorry?
Tina told everyone that she used David's gun to do it, but David didn't own a gun. Swords, knives, whatever kind of medieval things he could get his hands on, but never a gun. They scared him. The one she had was unregistered, probably picked up from some other scumbag she was cheating with.
Mrs. Shalatsky, I'm sorry to ask, but do you have Tina's phone number? I'd like to speak to her. She hesitated but finally nodded and disappeared back into the house. When she returned, she was carrying a leather-bound address book. Her fingers stroked the cover lovingly.
This was David's. He was old-fashioned. Liked to keep his things written down.
I thanked her after she handed the book to me and flipped to the O's. Tina's name and number were written in big, loopy handwriting that didn't match the rest. I guess she wrote it in herself.
Take the whole page. I don't want anything of hers here anymore,
Mrs. Shalotsky said. I really am sorry for your loss, I said as I prepared to leave. She nodded, misty-eyed, and held the book to her chest. My brothers demanded that I tell him everything before we had gotten into the car. I told him to shut up and just go. The poor woman didn't need to see us dissecting her story on our front lawn. As we pulled away, I looked at Tina's number again. Something about it struck me as familiar. My heartbeat quickened as cold realization slithered up my spine. Numbly, I reached for my phone, ignoring my brother's questions, and went to the block number section. Tina's number was already in my phone. The screen flashed with a new text notification from an unknown number. I had just enough time to read the message before the preview window disappeared.
I wish you hadn't done that.
Guys, I said. Go. Drive. Chris looked up at me in the rearview mirror, his brows raised in question.
What's up?
I got another text. He's here. He's watching us. Go. The Explorer's engine roared with life as Chris accelerated towards the highway. We were lucky in a way that there were so few other cars on the road. We were able to clear the town's limits in half the usual time. I kept checking my phone, but there were no other messages. A truck, a big Ford type that looked like it was on steroids, pulled onto the highway behind us. It rode close to our bumper, its engine revving. I was jerked forward, stopped only by my seatbelt pulling taut against my chest, and I clung to the back of Chris's seat to steady myself. The truck drove into our rear again, harder, and this time Chris swerved slightly. Kyle, still bent over, was thrown headfirst into the dashboard. Chris tried to right the car, but the truck was alongside us now, nudging our back bumper further and further off course until the Explorer was thrown into a spin. I screamed, grabbing at Chris like it would help us get back onto the asphalt, while we slid through the shoulder and slammed into a guardrail. Powder from the airbags filled the car. I cracked my head solidly against my window and my vision swam. Through a haze, I could make out Kyle, slumped in his seat. Chris, a splash of red on his neck from where the seatbelt bit into him, was leaning over Kyle, trying to unwedge the lockbox from beneath his seat. His ragged breathing and the blood rushing into my ears thumped painfully through my skull. A sound like a too-close firecracker, and the left back tire sank suddenly. I screamed again. My brothers swore at me and told me to get down. Something metallic tapped against the back windshield. All along the side of the car until a man was standing outside the window, grinning and tapping the butt of his sawed-off shotgun against the glass. I met his cold gaze, and couldn't even breathe to call for my brother. Chris twisted sharply. A woman, fair-haired and wild-eyed, had pressed her face and the muzzle of a pistol against the driver's side window. A man leaned so close to the window that his breath fogged it.
I told you I would be seeing you soon, Jules.
He and the woman took a step back, then another, then took aim. My shoulders shook with silent, desperate sobs. I stared into the black barrel of Scott's gun, and I knew that I was gonna die. That my brothers were going to die, and that it was my fault. I'm sorry, I whispered hoarsely to Chris. I was glad Kyle wasn't conscious to experience this. I closed my eyes and I let the tears fall freely. There was a brief blast from the car horn and the sound of squealing tires. I jumped and my eyes snapped open in time to see both a man and woman sliding off the front of a speeding maroon car. It skipped to a halt a little ways down the shoulder, and, as it was thrown into reverse, I noticed a bumper sticker in support of a local theater group. Mrs. Shalotsky braked beside us and rolled down her window. Her face was red, tear-stained, and torn with grief. Her fingers were wrapped around the steering wheel in a vice-like grip. Every inch of her was trembling. We stared at each other for a long, tense moment.
You kids okay?
It took a few months, but from computer and phone logs, police were able to piece together the sordid affair that had been Tina and Scott's relationship. Tina had been seeing Robbie, Scott's real name by the way, behind David's back for a few weeks when Mrs. Shalotsky came across them. No one would ever have known for sure what happened the night David was murdered, but from the little that was recovered from that time, it made it seem like David had confronted Tina. Things got heated, and Robbie shot him. The cuts and bruises that Tina had paraded about as proof of physical abuse were probably courtesy of Robbie after the fact. They were a sick pair who got their thrills by causing harm. They had made dozens of dating profiles with the sole purpose of gaining personal information in order to harass and horrify. They flippantly used David's pictures and history because Tina had easy access to it all. Since they had gotten away with so much already, they weren't worried about getting caught. All their victims had been completely at random, with no real structure or thought behind it. I had been their favorite. At first because of how curious I was, and then because of my refusal to stop living my life. They viewed this as a challenge and wanted to break me, making me too terrified to leave my home. When that didn't work, they decided they wanted to relive the thrill of what happened to David. We got so lucky that Mrs. Shalotsky, for reasons even she can't explain, felt compelled to look back out her window that afternoon. She recognized Tina driving the truck and knew something wasn't right. Because of her quick, decisive action, we each got away with only minor cuts, scrapes, and in Kyle's case, a concussion, but we were alive. My family and I will never stop being grateful. I've decided to keep a mostly low profile online and off of dating sites altogether. I'll stick to more traditional routes from here on out. I don't want to scare people with my story, but I do want to raise awareness of how dangerous it can be on here. So I hope that I've managed to do that for at least some people. Please, be careful, stay safe, and if it ever comes down to you or them, always choose you.
This experience left me pretty shaken up for a while. To begin, I was a fairly depressed and antisocial 15-year-old in high school, and on weekends I'd go and stay with my older sister in her apartment to get away from my parents and finally just relax. During this time, I'd gotten into studying astral projection, and I'd always been interested in the paranormal, as my mom and I had experienced things in our house, and my mom claimed that she could see the spirits. Anyway, one day after some reading, I decided to take the bus over to Toys R Us, where they still to this day sell Ouija boards to kids. I bought one of the silly glow-in-the-dark ones. My sister and I were really excited to start using it. Within a few minutes of putting our hands on the planchette, it began moving in a circle. Our first introduction was a little girl named Sarah. We end up chatting with this little spirit all night. Then, it turns into every single weekend. We begin to feel almost addicted to the board, always going to chat with Sarah. It was a long time ago, but I remember her saying that she was from the 1800s. She'd be so excited to talk every time we showed up. The planchette would spin in circles all over the board. We could even take our hands off of it, and it would continue to move. The addiction to the board goes on for months. Finally, one day we decide to ask Sarah to physically show us that she exists. We ask for a sign, and a strong breeze shoots straight into my ear so hard that I jumped back from the board. There was no AC on, no windows open, and no fans in the room. From here on, things get odd, and Sarah says that she is attached to me. I started getting an off feeling, and I ask, "Are you really Sarah, or are you someone else? Some of the things you say are pretty adult for a young girl." Then the planchette began to playfully spin all over the place, ending on no. I feel a sense of almost maniacal laughter in the air. It's hard to explain, but my sister feels it too. Turns out Sarah was actually a man named Solomon. Solomon said that he loved me and that he was going to follow me. From there we were freaked out and decided to stop using the board, but the pull was strong and it legitimately feels as if it were an addiction. After this incident, I can almost always feel someone watching me when I'm alone. I'd see the shape of a man in my head and the dark windows at night, but just for a second, enough to make me think I was losing my mind. I was frequently exploring church with my sister and was so scared from seeing figures pass by the windows and from feeling someone standing behind me that I told the preacher about our Ouija board use. He said he would pray and that I would have to ignore the spirit. Not the greatest advice. A month later, I had an odd and terrifying dream. Suddenly I'm above my body and in the den in my parents' house where I'd fallen asleep on the couch late at night. I look down at myself and then feel a presence by my body's head behind the couch near the hallway. There is a man standing there. He's wearing a black leather jacket, fitted, vintage-looking jeans, dark boots, kind of 40s, 50s-ish biker style. He was probably in his mid-20s. He had pale skin, dark, short-cut hair, and totally black eyes. He's almost attractive, if he weren't terrifying. He smiles at me eerily, and at light speed, jumps for my body. I panic and jump too, trying to get back into my body before he does. I wake up in a panic, sweating and shaking. Somehow, I eventually fall asleep at first light. And then when I awaken in the late afternoon, my mom tells me that she woke up to use the bathroom at night and fell to the ground in the living room having a seizure. I didn't know what to do or say. I was shocked. Could it have been from the paranormal encounter? Because she's a sensitive too? She used antidepressants frequently and switched them around a lot. But what a strange coincidence for it to happen that night. After that incident, life just continued on. So much of my teenage life felt negative at that age already that I just kept trekking forward, feeling someone behind me on some days not. The energy in my family's home was generally bad. Parents fighting constantly, father using drugs, mom in different phases of her bipolar. Definitely some energy a bad spirit or two could feed on. Fast forward to sophomore year in high school. I used to sit in the corner in band doing homework quietly, and one day a girl known as the school witch comes up to me. We'd maybe talked a few times, but didn't know each other very well. She simply states, "So there's a man following you, a spirit. I'm going to do a spell for you tonight to make him leave." Once again shocked, I tell her that there has been someone following me. She nods like, yes, obviously, then walks away before I can say anything else. By junior year, I'm dating a boy who lost his brother to suicide only months before we'd met. One night he calls in a panic and states that he was brutally attacked by a male spirit or demon in a dreamlike yet awake state. He said he felt someone sitting on him and could see a black spirit in the room. He called his brother's spirit to save him. He claims he felt a whoosh of energy and that his brother pushed the spirit off of his chest. He woke up really scared, saying that he'd never felt anything like it, and that he'd never had negative spirit encounters before except as a small child. What scares me is that he'd randomly have episodes after this that made him not in his right mind, or almost mad. At the time, I'd felt and seen his brother's spirit twice, and it was never a hostile feeling. I felt somewhat protected while dating him because of this, but Solomon's negative spirit was something I still worried about and felt on occasion. Years go by, and I eventually become best friends with a girl whose family ghost hunts. We ghost hunt together, experience some creepy stuff, and I become less fearful. 2 years into our relationship, I get the courage to tell her psychic aunt my story, and she seeks to find out more about this spirit. She connects with him and laughs some. He's 5150, hun. He's absolutely mad. He's not necessarily evil, but he attached himself to you because he likes how easily he can scare you. He doesn't necessarily want to hurt you, but your fear gives him pleasure. In life, it seems, he was quite mentally ill. I was absolutely stunned. It all made so much sense, and how would she know this? After the talk, my best friend and her aunt tell him to F off, and to imagine a white light and to let him know he's not welcome. This seems forward, but one night I feel the presence and it angers me. Years of someone just wanting to scare me. I yell at the empty room that I'm not afraid of him and that he's not welcome. I use sage, imagine white light, and yell for him to leave. I feel a stir in the energy, almost like he's not even that angry to leave. It felt more like an annoyance at losing his fear target. From that point on, I've had the upper hand. There was one more experience with him one day at 25 while in a toxic living situation. This was 6 years after the experience with my friend's aunt. I left my body again and was excited. Finally, astral projecting as an adult. I sit up, and lo and behold, there he is, standing by the bed. But this time I shoot white light at him. He's gone in an instant. Then my toxic roommate at the time walks through the wall to grab me. I wake up. Was he trying to warn me? Does he still visit me? Can I ever make him leave for good? Sometimes I wonder if he ever felt compassion for me. It was all so strange, and I frequently meditate and banish negative spirits or energy from around me. I've shut down a lot spiritually because of these incidents. I constantly state that nothing is allowed to bother me, but I wonder if somehow he'll be there forever. It worries me sometimes, especially because he'd stated on the board that he didn't want anyone to have me. I feel confident that spiritually I am strong, but I've always wondered if there was some deeper level of banishing that I could have, or should have done, or could still do. Anyway, I wanted to share this story because it's been both such a weight and a mystery to me for so many years. I don't know what I believe anymore. Sometimes I wonder if my extremely negative state of mind drew him to my depressed teenage self. Maybe somehow I created this negative entity? I doubt that one, but it is still possible. I feel in a much better place mentally, physically, and spiritually now, so I don't feel threatened by spirits, or really believe that he is around anymore. But who knows? I sage and cleanse my place almost daily and feel it to be a safe and light space. I will say that there is still so much I don't know when it comes to all of those incidents. I've gathered a few paranormal encrypted stories after moving to North Carolina. The silver UFO, the shadow person, the 6 lights, etc. But this one stuck out to me the most. I've never even heard of this thing or even knew that this thing existed, and I was a kid when I saw it. It could be my mind exaggerating, but another person with me saw it, and it freaked us both out. We were driving along the back roads of North Carolina and learning the shortcuts and ways to get around as we had just moved here. It was the evening, and it was around false summertime, the time where it's hot randomly in the spring, so the windows were rolled down. We were just having fun cruising and sightseeing. The other person with me was driving and was chit-chatting to me about the smells and plants that I should stay away from. We were passing a cow farm, so we rolled up our windows, and the curve past the farm was coming up, so we rolled them back down. Now after you hit this curve, there's a hill and it flattens out into a straight but crummy road. In the middle of the road, something blackish was walking. It was shaggy, and was just walking all calm as if it was sightseeing too. I remember my friend asking, "What's this dog doing?" It looked as big as a black bear or a derpy St. Bernard, and it walked with a normal stride. We slowly crept up on it, hoping that it would hear the car and move out of the way, but it didn't. So my friend gave the horn a little tap, and this thing finally turned around. Its eyes were reflected from the headlights. It hunched down and hissed. When it turned, its tail lifted, and it was long and black. It then darted off into the woods. My friend was puzzled. I just sat there in disbelief at what I had just witnessed. It was an odd and quiet ride back home. Fast forward to more than a decade later, me and a few friends were looking at local urban legends because one of them swore up and down that they saw the ghost that everyone was talking about and wanted to know more about it. I'm zoning out because I'm an introvert, and went looking around in the website that we found. I see this title called The Vampire Beast of North Carolina and was like, what the hell? North Carolina's got a hillbilly vampire? I click on it and read. Some beast was terrorizing locals and their farm animals, leaving puncture wounds, no blood, and leaving the body there. Multiple bodies of dead animals in one night, all dead the same way. I scoffed and say El Chupacabra, like Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory, and kept scrolling. I read some more and saw, here's what witnesses recount seeing, and when I scrolled down to see a hand-drawn picture of it, I nearly shat bricks. The photo the eyewitnesses had drawn of what they saw looked exactly like what I had seen over a decade ago. The shape, the tail, the color. I went pale and exited out of the page and just sat there, thinking on my life's existence up to this point, wondering if I had some sort of brain damage, because I was like, there's no way that this can be real, what I saw. But what really hit the nail on the coffin was that this thing was attacking people's farm animals, and I had seen this thing by a cow farm. I haven't seen this beast again. I really don't want to because I think it's a bad omen since I have a superstitious family, which is why I think paranormal and odd occurrences happen to us. Whenever we do have odd experiences, we don't speak about it to each other. I have been fascinated by ghosts and the supernatural my entire life. I've had a few experiences here and there, but this one in particular was the most significant and frightening. First, some background. My dad's side of the family is Native American, and some have a deep suspicion of owls. They're considered evil omens. Anyways, my grandmother was very, very attuned to spirits. She had the so-called second sight. She had a whole wealth of stories about her encounters with the paranormal, who she passed on to my aunt. But anywho, this next bit is relevant. A A few months before she passed away from lupus, she woke up in a panic and came running into my aunt's room. My grandmother was generally a stoic, unflappable woman, so this was not like her. She dragged my aunt into her bedroom asking if she heard it. My aunt heard nothing. What my grandmother had heard was the so-called death owl. She passed on not too long after that. Fast forward about 10 years or so, I'm up around 4 a.m. watching TV. As I recall, it was around December of 2008. I heard this noise outside. It sounded like a woman weeping. The best way I can describe it was a voice that was caught between an owl's cry and a human's. It was very unnatural. I got a cold feeling in my gut because I knew exactly what it was, and it scared the ever-loving crap out of me. I remember being paralyzed with fear. I grew up out in the country, and I know what an owl sounds like. I've also heard bobcats, foxes, and the dying screams of rabbits. This was none of those things. Others have tried to claim that it was just an animal, but it was like no other animal I've ever heard. That unearthly wailing noise, like it was in mourning. It was the kind of sound that freezes the blood in your veins. At the time, I thought it might be foretelling my father's imminent death, since if you hear it, it either means that you or a family member is going to die, or it predicts great disaster. And for clarification, at the time, my dad was having some significant heart trouble, but he's much better now. Now comes the twist. On April 9th, 2009, a huge wildfire swept through my area. A lot of houses burned down, and mine was among them. When we came back, my home was nothing but a pile of smoking rubble. It took me a bit to make the connection, but I am positive that the death owl, or banshee, was an omen that predicted this disaster. One thing's for sure, I hope to God that I never hear that thing again, because I will never forget it. I have a suspicion that this thing stalks my family. I can't be certain. I'll have to do some research into my family tree. I know this might sound unbelievable to some, but I swear till the day that I die that this is all 100% true. So there you have it, folks. My most significant paranormal encounter. When I was younger, I used to be obsessed with ghosts and all sort of haunting shows. Now, I'd never particularly had a reason to believe that my house was haunted, but one day my brother came home claiming to have found $10 out of nowhere. I'll never know for sure if he was just messing with me, but after curiosity got a hold, I asked him where he really got the money from. Stupid me assumed maybe a friend? Perhaps he stole it from my parents' wallet? My parents never claimed to have been missing any money, however, something they definitely would have voiced being distraught about had they noticed that we had taken their cash. The story he gave me was that a young girl, maybe about the age of 7, had followed him onto the school bus that afternoon. He had never met this girl before, and had never seen her around at school, but she decided to sit in the seat right in front of him. After riding the bus for a while, she started to talk to him. Nobody else could see her, according to him, and the other kids were giving him weird looks. Eventually, she handed him $10 with a note, and then subsequently got off the bus at the next stop. I immediately assumed that he was lying and laughed, of course. I asked him to show me the note, which he promptly retrieved from his room and passed me a tiny piece of paper. A shiver ran down my spine, as the note wasn't in his handwriting. It read, "I'll help you, but only this time. which I believe was in response to the fact that my brother was begging my parents for a Zelda charm bracelet for months, which they refused to buy him. Given that he had $10 now, he could just buy it himself, though. Of course, I was extremely intrigued by this, even if it sounded absurd. I suggested we make a makeshift Ouija board to see if we could contact anyone. So we wrote the alphabet on a piece of paper and grabbed a necklace to hover above the DIY board. My brother was interested too, so he decided it could be fun. Mind you, I was in 6th grade and he was in the 4th at the time, so any sort of movement from the necklace caught our attention and we immediately thought that it was a ghost. After asking a few questions, the necklace began to move and shake. Either my brother was really good at tricking me by slowly sliding the necklace across the board, or it really was something paranormal. We were able to get a name. Kate. After asking dumb things like, "Did you watch me complete the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time?" and getting a yes, me and my brother decided to stop for the night after starting to get creeped out. We never said goodbye before ending. Eventually, playing with the board would be a daily occurrence. We thought we'd made a friend, and truly believed that someone was talking to us. Me and my brother decided to take things a step further and try to record something. So we both got our tablets, placed them in front of our TV, and hit record. The first thing I asked was, if someone was here, move something in the room. There was nothing. Okay, well, maybe the ghost is shy? We decided to repeat the same question, but this time we said that we would leave the room and give it a minute. We went downstairs for 5 minutes, and when we got back up, our tablets had both fallen to the floor and stopped recording. Coincidence? I mean, things fall, especially when you're not careful at placing them. So we brushed it off. In December of 6th grade, though, things got really weird. I had started hearing voices in my head, claiming that they were the ghost I was talking to while playing the Ouija board. I got so scared one night that I had grabbed the Bible that one of my religious friends had gifted me, and would sleep with it. Eventually, I told my mom that there was a ghost telling me scary things. I won't get into detail, as some of it was a little graphic. She and my dad argued for a while about whether or not I was schizophrenic, and if I should see a therapist. So, out of fear, I never told them that I was hearing voices again, but I would space out often, talking and having conversations with this thing that I believed to be a ghost. Eventually, I forgot about the ghost, and we no longer talked. I will never know what that voice was, if I was genuinely insane, or if they were just intrusive thoughts. I was just glad for it finally to have stopped. Nothing necessarily paranormal has happened to me since, besides my TV turning on randomly in the middle of the night, or feeling that someone was pushing my legs with some sort of unknown force every once in a while. I sum it up to just be my imagination playing tricks on me now. But I do still have this looming feeling that ever since I've played with that Ouija board, I have some sort of spirit attached to me, following me. Not a bad one, but just a constant presence. There has always been folklore around black crows and their cawing that my mother has always believed in. I've always been in love with anything creepy, so I bought into black crows aesthetically, but never actually believed that they served as an omen for death, as they're commonly known for. That was until I was told this story later in my life. My mother is from Central America and was born and raised there, only moving to the United States around 2000. She's always been superstitious. She would tell me when I was a kid to be careful around crows. Try not to let one fly in my path or disturb one, because they symbolize death and can predict it if someone in your life is about to die. I was just a kid, so, again, I never really believed any of that, and just promised to follow these rules to please her. It was still hot and sunny out when I was beginning elementary school, and my mother and father were at home painting our back deck as we had just moved into a new house. This was the first house that we lived in since my mother moved from Central America to the States. All of my mother's family were thousands of miles away from her. She was always worried that something would happen to someone in her family while she was gone. My father was on all fours painting the deck, and my mother had come outside to give him a drink when a black crow swooped down right over my father's head. My mother immediately began to panic and cry. Before my father had a chance to ask her what was wrong, the home phone rang. My mother picked up the phone, crying, and burst into Spanish asking, "Is it Dad?" and "What happened?" before she even knew who was on the other side of the call. It was my mother's family calling to tell her that her father had indeed just passed away. I came home that evening and my father explained that my grandfather had passed on, but he didn't tell me of the crow story. When I was a little older, my mother had told me the story and my father confirmed the order of the events. That story is so strange to me, and ever since then I, too, have been wary of crows and their presence in my life. My mother said that she just knew her father had died in that moment. When the phone rang, she knew she was getting the phone call. I find it interesting that the crow flew so low over my father, perhaps directly symbolizing that a father figure in someone's life had passed away. Where I live, around that time of year, a crow should have been nowhere in sight. There had not been any around that day, or for months even. All of it is just a little too bizarre and creeps me out to this day. About 2 years ago, my Nana brought home a Ouija board that she found at a yard sale. I have always been a true believer in the paranormal, and it's always been one of my peak interests. I have heard or read enough stories and watched enough shows to know not to mess around with a Ouija board, and quite frankly, they kind of freaked me out, so I wanted nothing to do with it. My Nana, on the other hand, doesn't believe in the paranormal whatsoever, and thought it would just be a fun game for myself, my brother, and the oldest of my 2 cousins. I left it on the dining room table for days before she made me put it away. I ended up sliding it under my bed in hopes of just forgetting about it. My brother, 11, and my cousin, 12, bugged me about it constantly because they wanted to play with it and I wouldn't let them. I tried to explain to them that it wasn't just a game, and that it shouldn't be messed with, but they were preteen boys who couldn't help but do things that they shouldn't. One day after I got home from work, the boys were there and I had this sneaking suspicion that they played with it. I looked under my bed and it was there, but I just had this odd feeling. That's when I went downstairs and interrogated them about it. At first, of course, they denied it, but I saw right through them until they finally admitted that they had in fact played with the board. I asked them if they had said goodbye when they were done, and they claimed that they did. My cousin likes to over-exaggerate stories big time, and makes things up to be overly dramatic, so when he told me about a couple of things that supposedly happened, I didn't believe him at all. Also, they were boys who liked to mess with each other, so I assumed that's what was occurring. Anyways, a couple of nights later I got in bed, and as I lay there trying to fall asleep, I got this feeling like I was being watched. I looked over at my closet, which has 2 sliding doors, and I noticed one of the doors is slightly opened, leaving a small space. It creeped me out for some reason, so I turned and faced the other way, trying to ignore everything and just fall asleep. I finally passed out, and the next thing I know, I'm woken up by what felt like someone or something hitting me in the back of the head. I was lying on my back, so the back of my head was fully on my pillow, which made it even weirder. And it wasn't a light hit, either. It scared me so bad. I was shaking. I look around my room and I don't see anything, but then all of a sudden I hear my floor creaking like someone is walking around my bed. After laying there for a good little while, I finally got the courage to get up and grab my phone and book it to my living room. I sat and tried to calm down. I could still feel a tingling, pulsating sensation at the back of my head. I turned on my phone and realized it was 3 in the morning. I called my boyfriend, now husband, with tears streaming down my face from being so freaked out. He didn't pick up, and I swear I called him another 15 to 20 times before I finally gave up. I sat in the chair until my Nana got up around 6. I didn't tell her what had happened, because I knew she wouldn't believe me and would say I was acting stupid. After she got up, I had breakfast and then called my boyfriend again, and he finally answered. He told me he had his phone on silent mode so that he didn't know that I had been calling. I gave him so much crap for this, let me tell you. I told him what had happened and he felt so bad and felt like an idiot. He told me he would have come over in a heartbeat to comfort me and was so apologetic. Later that day, he came over and we took the Ouija board to a junkyard to get rid of it. My husband is the only one in my family that knows what happened, and I didn't experience anything again after I got rid of the Ouija board. So once again, moral of the story, Ouija boards should not be messed with. I was reading somebody's Reddit post today where they talked about their mother being scared because she heard 3 knocks and related it to the 3-knock omen, which I had never heard of. I decided to do some research on it, and apparently there's a superstition around hearing 3 knocks because it's supposedly followed by a death in the family or someone that's close to you. That has happened to me. A couple years ago, I went to a mountain resort in California for a little over a month and stayed with my sister and brother-in-law who lived there. Around the same time when I came, they got a new roommate. He was a nice guy, maybe in his late 20s, early 30s, an ex-alcoholic, but overall, just a really great guy. I spent a lot of my summer going on hikes and playing video games with him and my brother-in-law, and I would say that I got to know him pretty well, but not as well as my sister and her husband did. The roommate, Jack, had lost a close friend a year or so before when he got drunk and decided to fall asleep outside in the middle of a snowstorm, which apparently happens more often than you would think. Since then, Jack had never so much as touched a beer, and he was quite proud of it. Anyways, it was around my 3rd or 4th week there, when my sister and I were watching The Babadook, and it was pretty late at night, around 1, maybe 2 a.m. The movie ended, and she was going to let me sleep in the room with her since Jack and her husband were out camping or something, but I don't really remember what they were doing. It was silent in the house, and all the lights were off when we heard 3 loud, distinct knocking sounds. I asked her if she had heard them, and she said yes, but it was probably just the dryer making noises upstairs. It was a fairly new dryer that didn't make any sound. Maybe around 10 minutes later we heard the same 3 knocks again, but my sister wrote it off to the dryer being noisy once more. It didn't sound like a broken dryer, since it was 3 obvious knocks, though. I don't want to go too far into the history of the house or anything, but it was definitely haunted. Things would randomly fly off of shelves, and the lights would randomly turn themselves off. Also, some of the furniture that the house came with had what we thought were blood stains. I wrote that night off to the spirit in their house messing with us since we were watching a scary movie, up until today, when I put everything together. 2 days after I left, they found Jack dead in his room upstairs. They said he drank himself to death, which was surprising considering how proud he was of getting sober. Maybe the death knocks were real, or maybe not. Maybe it was all just a coincidence. What do you think? Also, I should probably also mention that he had a bad liver from his previous drinking problem. I don't really know how that works, but I guess one night of extremely heavy drinking did it for him. I didn't push for more information about his death since it really shook my sister up. All she said was that he drank himself to death. Disclaimer. In no way am I saying that death knocks are 100% real, or that if you hear them, a family member or friend will definitely drop dead. As for the furniture that we thought had blood on it, it might not have been blood. Maybe it was just an odd-colored stain from where something had been spilled. I'm not saying that I'm sure that Jack's death was related to anything that happened in the house. I just made the connection and found it fascinating. I'll let you decide whether or not she was really a vampire. Either way, I promise that this is a true story. It happened around December 2017. I had just finished high school, and one of my friends was hosting a house party. It was out in the country, large property, lovely view. It was a great place to celebrate the end of exams. I recognized a lot of people there and knew them quite well. However, there were two guests I didn't recognize, a boy and a girl. He was a stoic character with a solid build, not quite muscle, not quite fat, not quite someone that you would want to annoy. She was a thin figure with long amber hair and fair skin. He would scan the crowds while she shyly cradled a bottle. No one else was paying any attention to them, and I could tell they felt uncomfortable. They seemed nice enough, so I grabbed a friend and walked over to them, hoping that I could put them at ease. My friend left pretty quickly, but the girl seemed relieved that I was paying attention to them. She told me her name was Verity. Bit of an unusual name, but I thought it was pretty. Her boyfriend seemed a bit more comfortable too, but he didn't say much. I don't recall his name. Verity and I chatted for a while, but I was quickly running out of small talk. I asked her about the alcohol she was drinking and what kind she prefers, that sort of thing. She replied casually, it's okay, but my favorite substance is blood. I think that's a good cue to run away, but my curiosity got the better of me. I asked her why she enjoyed the taste of blood. I've cut my lip before, and I remember the taste being quite sour. She told me that the flavor is dependent on a person's health. The healthier they are, the sweeter their blood. It suddenly made sense as to why her boyfriend was built like an athlete. She taught me a few weird things about hematology and was very knowledgeable about medieval execution methods. She explained them with a strange fondness. It was almost nostalgia. I only knew the Viking blood eagle, but that was enough to get her excited. We ended up talking all night. I listened to her gore-filled lectures, and they both listened to me as well. Even though my interests in stories were much less interesting in comparison, they didn't seem to mind. They smiled and encouraged me. In between subjects, Verity would draw some blood from her boyfriend, either with her nails or her fangs. He seemed okay with it. I talked to her boyfriend for a short while, too. We got along just fine, but we had very little in common, so it was a bit tricky to hold a conversation. He was into sports and cars, so he was probably human. After a while, I tried to encourage them to meet my friends. Verity, however, didn't like that. She was very possessive and insisted that I stay with them all night. I wasn't in the mood to argue with a bloodthirsty historian, and she was being very friendly with me, so I agreed. She didn't bite me once, and I'm grateful her boyfriend was there to feed her. Maybe she was a vampire, or maybe she just had some really weird habits. Either way, I hope you enjoyed my story. I do believe in the paranormal. Not routinely and not as an explanation for everything, but I definitely believe that some things just can't be logically explained. I've dabbled in divination for the past couple years, which has led me to notice more universal symbolism and omens. Recently, I've seen some weird ones. I was driving around my area the other day and passed a funeral procession twice. It struck me as sort of unsettling and out of the ordinary. I drive around a lot, and I don't usually see funeral processions around just randomly. I was a little bit anxious by it, especially so when I passed the hearse itself, but I pretty much brushed it off. That same day, I was pulling into a drive-thru at around 3 a.m., and a black cat came out of seemingly nowhere. It strolled in front of the car and continued walking into nothing. It felt very rare to see, since I live in a well-populated suburb that doesn't usually have animals roaming about. This morning, there was a black cat watching my window on the windowsill of the house across from mine. As I looked at the cat, it began to thunderstorm. I know it all sounds really small and maybe a touch overzealous, but I couldn't help but feeling odd about these things because of how out of the ordinary that they felt, and silently spooky. Not to mention, all happening in the same couple of days. The closeness of it all made me curious, and I had to look into it, just to see if these things were things that other people believed to be bad omens. In my very unofficial research, I have found that 1. Passing a funeral can be bad luck and can, quote-unquote, hasten your own death. 2. In European folklore, a black cat crossing your path can be unlucky and lead to misfortune and death. Occasionally, however, they can represent good luck, but from what I've found, it's fairly situational. And 3. In Greek mythology, thunder could represent punishment to the humans by the gods, associated with Zeus. Clearly, death is kind of a theme here. All of this just doesn't sit well with me, and it's accompanied by a generally strange feeling that I've noticed prevailing in my mood lately. Something just feels off, you know? This happened in 2011. Back then I was very engaged in political activism, and I ended up organizing an Occupy movement in the city I was living in, along with some other fellows. We camped in a downtown square for about 4 months, and throughout this period a lot of people came in and out. By the second month I had to travel to another city where my parents were living for a week. When I came back to the occupation, there was a guy living there that had arrived exactly when I had left. He had somehow already had some respect from other people in a very short period of time. He was tall, blonde, long hair, a bit hippie, had a profound voice that implied self-confidence. He had by some means a strange aura. But okay, no big deal, seemed like a cool guy after a while. Over time he became my friend, and we ended up having long conversations about pretty much everything that interested me and vice versa, like occultism, magic, UFOs, etc., until he brought up the vampirism subject, which I was not familiar with at the time. He explained to me some stuff like that vampires were basically normal people that could manage their own life force, and apparently they have been misinterpreted since always. He told me that there were some secret vampire groups, small ones, that preserved the rituals. There was no blood-sucking thing going on, as he said that blood was an analogy to life force. They were not actually sucking it from people, but they could indeed take somebody's life force. But more important, he said, was to know how to use your own. The conversation finished there. The whole thing seemed fascinating to me, and after a while, we went to sleep. Some days later, here's what happened. My house was quite close to the occupation, and once in a while some of my friends would often ask me to use the bathroom or to have a shower, and then this guy asked me the same. I said yes, no problem at all. Everything went fine, the guy had his shower, and we were walking back to the occupation, and he brought up the subject about vampirism again. This time he was wearing an anonymous plastic mask, which completely covered his face. He starts to explain to me how one can control their own life force inside dreams, and how would that affect the actual material body. Meanwhile, as he's explaining that, I see his jaw making a strange movement, as if there was something stuck between his teeth, and he was trying to clean it. When he finishes the explanation, he calls me by my name and raises the mask slightly so I can take a look at his mouth. And then I saw this huge canine tooth. He pulled the mask back down quickly. I didn't know how to react, so I just remained calm when I asked him what was that for if they didn't actually suck blood from other people. He told me that it worked out as a sort of antenna to capture different vibrations, and he managed to construct it by molding his life force into that shape inside his dreams. He asked me if I would be interested in doing the same. I told him that it sounded interesting, and he just left me to think about it. We arrived at the occupation as if nothing had happened. I didn't see any strange movements by his hands trying to insert a fake tooth into his mouth, or trying to remove it after. The sensation I got was that he pulled the tooth out by a jaw movement. The whole thing was just very strange to digest. I had no idea what to do, so I called my friend and he just said that the whole story sounded too crazy to be believable. We still lived together in the occupation for a while, but I never brought up the subject again. The guide totally noticed my attempt to avoid it, so he didn't push me on it either. There was another strange fact after a while. Once he was shirtless, and crouched organizing some stuff inside of his tent, and the muscles on his back formed into the shape of a winged dragon. The occupation eventually finished, and that guy ended up dating a girl that he met there, and they both had a kid together. He seemed pretty normal, despite those 2 occasions. This happened to me when I was in high school. I was at my friend's house at the time, who lived in an apartment building. She had a neighbor who lived upstairs, and was a few years younger than us, who we hung out with when I visited my friend's apartment. On this specific day, my friend's neighbor mentioned that she had a Ouija board, and asked if we wanted to use it with her. We both agreed, as I personally didn't think Ouija boards were actually paranormal, and thought it was a myth. We went into a garage area of the apartment building and put our fingers on the planchette. For the first few hours, nothing really even happened. Eventually, we had movement on the planchette and started asking questions to this spirit, who would answer us. I forgot who, but someone asked if the spirit was trying to communicate with anyone. Interestingly enough, it spelled out my name. I was skeptical, and thought it was one of my friends messing with me, so I asked what its name was. It then spelled out my grandmother's name, who died 6 months before this Ouija board encounter. I started getting a little uncomfortable, as my grandmother's name is in another language, and my friends did not know this language, nor have I ever told them what her name was. They wouldn't even know how to spell it either. Weirded out, I asked what my grandmother wanted. She started spelling out URGR, and then the planchette started going in weird circles, and even going off of the board, and wasn't spelling out anything that made sense. So I asked for further clarification, and then just "You are great" popped up. This will be important later, so keep that in mind. Anyway, at that point I thought it was just one of us moving it weirdly, so I said goodbye. A few days later, my grandmother's husband, my grandfather, suddenly passed away. It was unexpected, as he was in great health, and it was right before Christmas, and he was so excited for Christmas. As I was at his funeral, I remembered sitting there and thinking about the Ouija board, and that's when it hit me. When my grandmother initially tried to spell out something that started with GR, I realized that grandfather starts with GR. But then the planchette had moved around so weirdly when my grandmother couldn't spell out the rest of the word, as if something had been stopping my grandmother from completing the word and warning me. The next few months were hell, as I started blaming myself, and was convinced that I had somehow contributed to my grandfather's death by using this board. It got to the point that I became suicidal, and the scariest part is, my thoughts felt as if they were not my own. As if something were trying to lead me toward taking my life, as they were very dark. I can't explain it, as it could have been guilt, but I felt like something was watching me all the time and felt a strange presence in the next few months after using the board. There's also the fact that the night of when I used the Ouija board, I was in the bathroom and I was underneath some lights. I had a strange sensation and felt that I needed to walk away, but right when I did, the lights shattered and would have injured me if I had been standing underneath. I eventually confessed to my mother about the Ouija board experience, and right when I did, I felt a giant weight lift off of my shoulders. The negative and dark thoughts were slowly disappearing, and I started to not feel the dark presence anymore when I overcame these thoughts. However, I was still wondering if the spirit that I had contacted was even really my grandmother. I also wondered if I was imagining this dark presence and the dark thoughts that I had had. Fast forward, I was at an overnight event at my school and another friend brought a Ouija board. I decided to use it one more time with this friend and try to get some answers. At one point, the Ouija board said that it was trying to contact me specifically. When we asked who it was, it then started spelling out D-E-V. We started panicking, but then it spelled out to a word that I forgot. I dismissed it and thought it was nothing, but my friend decided to look up the word. A few weeks later, she told me that the word meant devil in another language. It was then confirmed to me that it may not have been my grandmother who was contacting me the first time. There's also the fact that there may have been something that was trying to get to me and did not have good intentions. To this day, I am convinced that this spirit only tried to warn me about my grandfather so that when he passed, I would have felt guilty. By feeling guilty, I was more vulnerable to the spirit's influences, to the point that I would almost take my own life. I do not know if this is what actually happened, but it's the only logical explanation that I have. This is a story my grandma and grandpa told me a while back. I'm originally from a small town in Pennsylvania, and my grandfather was a state trooper for a majority of the time that he lived there before retirement. He took a course on hazardous waste removal. I can't remember his reasoning, but he was trained to be a guy in a hazmat suit who took toxic or irradiated waste away from certain locations. One night, while he and my Nana were asleep, he violently jolted straight up to a sitting position in his bed, still asleep. He pointed to a chair in the corner of his room and said to my Grams, who had been awoken by his movement, "Mary Lou, he's sitting right there in the chair. Do you see him?" My Nana was freaked out, so she tried to get him to lay back down in the bed, which took a few minutes, but eventually he was back to sleeping soundly. In the morning, my pop said that he saw Death sitting in the chair in his room staring at him, and he took that as an omen that he was going to die very soon. About 2 months later, an incident at 3 Mile Island occurred, and the police force out there asked my pop's station to send all of his people there who had hazardous waste training to help get it cleaned up. My pop decided to take 2 weeks off and take a trip to Mexico with my mom and uncle because of the dream that he had had. and when he got back, many of the people that he had known at his office had some kind of radiation poisoning that eventually killed them. I don't tell it as well as they do, but I thought it was an interesting story. A few nights ago, I awoke to being restrained by what I can only describe as a vampire. I'm familiar with the paranormal, but this was a particularly impressive experience. I was pinned to my bed, trapped underneath the body of a young woman. It was as if she was trying to bite me, but at the same time doing everything in her power to stop herself. Or she was doing her best to bite me, but something was preventing her from being able to. She was struggling and jerking, breathing rapidly and kind of growling and snorting. The way she was moving, it was almost as if she was on fast forward. Her teeth were grazing my neck with her mouth wide open. I could feel them against my skin, but was sure that they never penetrated. I was unable to break free and struggled in fear, but realized that I couldn't get away, so just gave in and embraced her. When I embraced her, I found that I actually felt an overwhelming love, despite the disturbing nature of the experience. I had a very clear image of what she looked like. She had long, wavy hair, and somehow resembled myself. I could also feel her intention. Even though she was doing something violent, it was clear to me that she was good at heart. Eventually, because I was alternatively struggling against her, I did break free, and she disappeared. I had a similar experience to this around a year ago, where I awoke to a dark, humanoid shadow being standing beside me, manipulating my energy. That being, however, I felt was inherently evil. This vampiric entity, on the other hand, didn't give off a sinister vibe. It just seemed to me that she was trapped in some kind of karma, unable to control herself. I know about the sleep paralysis demon phenomenon, and that there is supposed to be logical explanation for these occurrences. Honestly, I completely disbelieved in anything supernatural for most of my life. After everything I've experienced, though, it's impossible to deny that these kinds of things are real. This story comes from my girlfriend, who told me that a couple of months ago her mom was exiting an office that she works at in the middle of the night when she saw an apparition. She described it as looking like a very abnormally large black dog that was staring her down in the parking lot. Apparently the dog charged at her and vanished as it went through her, never to be seen again after that. Now, my girlfriend's mom is no stranger to the paranormal and has tons of crazy stories, and this being the latest incident, she knew it meant something bad. She called my girlfriend frantically, asking her to check on her grandpa, who they were taking care of for about a year at that point, but he was okay. 2 days later, however, he passed on. This also happened to my girlfriend's grandma on her mom's side, where she was outside and saw a large, black dog on the roof of her house staring her down until it jumped down and vanished into her as well. Her first husband died after she received this visit from the dog. From what I could take from the story, it seemed more immediate than just 2 days. It was the first I've ever heard of a large black dog figure appearing, and a few hours later my curiosity led me to searching for similar experiences online. I stumbled across mythology and folklore, speaking of how large black dogs and/or hellhounds are omens of death. All this started when I was in middle school. I was young and stupid and seriously interested in the paranormal. I grew up in a religious home, and I am still religious. I have no explanation for what happened to me. I started experimenting with the paranormal with my friends. We thought it would be really cool to use a Ouija board. At first, nothing seemed to happen, but then the board started to move. We asked all the normal stupid questions like, "Who's there?" or "Is anyone here?" It moved really slow and steady. I was sure that my friend was messing with me. I got spooked and we threw out the board. But that is not where this story ends. Moving forward, I started having really weird nightmares. I would consistently wake up at 3 a.m. or not be able to sleep at all. I was basically a zombie throughout my entire day. There was one time when I was at home alone on FaceTime when I heard my mom yell my name. I yelled back and didn't get a response. My friend then reminded me that I was home alone. I immediately checked my whole house and no one was there. She heard the voice too, though, so it couldn't be explained. I continued hearing voices and knocks and was still unable to sleep. There was one time where I was in my room doing homework and someone pulled my hair so hard that my head actually yanked down. I got so spooked that I ran to my dad and told him what had happened. He obviously didn't really believe me. My brother started noticing weird things too, and that's when I got really uncomfortable. He and I were in my room, and I went to the bathroom. When I came out, his face was stone white. He claimed he saw a little girl run past my bedroom door. It couldn't have been me because I used the bathroom connected to my room. We don't have any other siblings. Another time, I was on FaceTime again with a separate friend, and I had my phone out in front of me when I walked into my bathroom. My friend asked, "What is that behind you?" And as soon as she said that, the lights shut off. I sprinted to my brother's room, and of course, nobody believed me again. The icing on the cake, though, was when I was asleep one night and I woke up suddenly. It was 3 a.m. again, and I was completely paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move. All I could see was a hooded figure in all black staring at me from the corner of my room. I couldn't see its eyes. I just knew that it was looking at me. It began to float toward me, and then pressed all of its weight on my chest. I couldn't talk or move. After silently crying for what felt like forever, I finally croaked out the word Jesus, and it fled from the room through my door. After that incident, I told my mom everything about the Ouija board and the experiences, and she finally believed me. She could see how scared that I truly was and knew that I couldn't be lying. She immediately got to work and blessed me and the house. I haven't had anything that terrifying happen to me since, and I no longer live in that home. This is a story that my grandma told me, so it may not be 100% accurate, but I'll try and tell it the best that I can. More than 70 years ago, sorry for not knowing the exact timeline, my great-grandfather died of a heart attack. He was, of course, buried like any other person. Here we have a tradition that every 5 years we lift the remains of the deceased, and the family can decide if they should put the body somewhere else or leave it there. This is mostly due to the empty spaces in the graveyard if the deceased doesn't have any family. So they raised my great-grandfather's remains, but the weird thing was that he had not decomposed. He looked exactly as if he had just been buried. After 5 more years had passed, they went to lift his remains again, but this time, the coffin was empty. This is not how the story ends. 10 years after all this happened, my aunt, that was 8 at the time, was home alone one day, and she heard a strange noise in the house, so she went to investigate. In the kitchen there was a strange man who looked at her and said, "Don't be scared. I just came to see my first granddaughter." And then he disappeared. Later that day, she told her parents, and after describing the man, they went to get an old photo album, and she identified my great-granddad. When my grandmother tells this story, she tends to omit the last part that my aunt told me. According to my grandmother, the priest probably sold my great-grandfather's corpse because it wasn't decomposing, and she says that my aunt is lying about having seen him. This is a true story. When I was in high school, I had a friend who lived near our house. We would always walk from school to our homes. We were pretty close, and we talked about anything. One time, when we were walking along the road, she suddenly spoke and said that she smelled candles. It was a busy street, and it was only around 4 p.m., I think. I replied, "It must be from the truck." I said this because one had just driven past us when she said that. She had a serious face, which was unusual because she was more talkative between the two of us. She insisted that she could still smell it as we continued walking, but stopped after a while. Fast forward to the next day. It was Saturday and I had just woken up. I literally got goosebumps. I felt so shocked when I read her text. It said that her father had died. Do you also believe in superstitions? Here in our country, a smell of flower or candle indicates the death of a person. I've always been pretty sensitive, and so have quite a few people in my family. I've seen dark figures, recorded a few voices, but nothing too major before this story. It was my senior year of high school, and I had been going through a period of what some may like to call paranormal investigating with my friends. We were spending time visiting cemeteries and abandoned houses, like most teenagers do. Just having fun being scared. Well, my friend Tyler found this Ouija board in an abandoned house that he had explored a month or so back and asked me if I wanted it. You see, he knew I was into the paranormal with all the love I had for being scared. I liked scary movies, haunted houses, and anything to get the adrenaline going. So of course I said yes. My friends Alex, David, and I decided to skip school, and I asked them if they wanted to use this Ouija board with me. They were along for the ride, and we had planned to find a place to do this. My house. My house was already known to be haunted because due to some experiences that I had had in my basement. So it seemed like the appropriate choice. Now my friend David didn't believe in anything paranormal. No ghosts or any of that stuff. So he decided to film this for us. Alex is sitting across from me, and I have my hands on the eye by myself. I figured you weren't supposed to do this alone from what I had seen in movies, but we did it anyway, just to see what would happen. Alex begins to ask some questions. Basic ones at first, like, is there anyone here with us? What's your name? What do you want? Alex then asks, are you trying to hurt Chris? And nothing really happens in that moment, but I do remember this distinct chill run down my spine. I brushed it off. We decided to watch the video back on David's phone just to see what it looked like. As we're watching this back, when it comes to the question of, are you trying to hurt Chris? In the video, my head tilts back and I say yes, in 2 different voices. One in my own voice, and one in a deep, guttural voice. We all look at each other and exclaim, oh my god. You didn't say that. You didn't say anything. And needless to say, we got rid of that board and never really talked about it again. But that was one of the most terrifying experiences I have ever had. I was wondering if anyone could offer their thoughts or an explanation on a paranormal experience that I had as a child. When I was 11, my younger sister passed away from a very sudden death. Months before this incident, I had a vision in the middle of the night that I had never made sense of until recently. I had woken up and saw a floating orb of white light in my room. Inside of it was a young child, around 4, maybe 5 years old, the same age as my late sister, with short hair, wearing a Victorian-style nightgown. I came close to it and stared at it for a minute or two, and then went back to sleep. The next day, I was filled with overwhelming anxiety and the feeling of someone's presence in the house. Only years after this vision and the death of my sister have I thought that this could possibly be some sort of omen or warning of her death. At first, I thought she was on drugs. But then she did something that made me wonder if she was telling the truth. I was 16. A friend and I were walking through a local park at night when we saw this Asian woman wearing what looked like a traditional Chinese dress. She was dancing alone in the grass, and she then started running toward us, scared the crap out of me, and began telling us how handsome that we were. This woman appeared to be in her mid to late 20s, and honestly, she was stunningly beautiful. She kept telling us that she was a vampire, and that she was centuries old. I was thinking, okay, she's obviously on something, or she's crazy. But then she gazes into my eyes and says, "Do you want to feel my energy?" I said, "Sure," and she then placed her hand a few inches from my face. The amount of energy or whatever it was that came from her hand caused my entire skull to vibrate and made me extremely dizzy. I have no idea what that could have been. I have never seen her again to this day, but I often think about it. I'm 23 now. I tried researching Asian myths and legends, trying to discover some kind of spirit or demon common to a specific culture that resembles her. Could anyone tell me what this apparition was, or if she was just a crazy woman with psychic abilities?